This happened when I was a sophomore in college and hadn't been assigned to a dorm after my freshman year. My name is Garrett, rushed to find off-campus housing for a long time. In the end, I was placed in a co-op section. The neighborhood consisted of 3 houses, somewhat close to campus but not quite wasn't perfect, but it was inexpensive and I had few choices, and I also had a bike, so I didn't mind the additional. The majority of the residents' travel time was young pupils such as myself. Yet there were a few exceptions. There were a few older alumni and 1 or 2 TAS, those pursuing degrees later in life, but the individual who promptly I was drawn to an elderly woman who resided in a different home from I could see that woman might be in her late 50s, although she appeared somewhat. She was older, her hair was graying, and walked like she had a kind of limp. She had a back issue of some sort and was actually quiet and largely private, and she constantly had this expressionless look on her face. I figured that she had some sort of, perhaps a link to the university professor, or perhaps a former student, but nobody stated and I didn't ask the initial. The last odd thing I witnessed her doing was in our shared kitchen, which was somewhat strange in the first place because since other homes had kitchens of their own, she didn't know why she would be spending time in hours she didn't spend eating, cooking, or even conversing with anybody. She was simply standing there, with the others being chatting and rushing to prepare dinner, and she didn't try listening to music, and joined in. She merely gazed at us indifferently. I glanced at her several times and I had the impression that she was observing me in particular, despite the fact that I realized that was unlikely, and nobody recognized her, which I believed to be a little strange as well. Perhaps they knew later that week I did something that I didn't. Was working in my room doing some schoolwork when I seen her once more. I looked out of my bedroom window, and she was looking up at it, me as if that wasn't already odd. She wasn't even on the sidewalk itself. Instead, in the center of the road, it was becoming late and she must have been freezing because she was also cold. I couldn't tell if she was out there, gazing through my window, or simply in the direction of the house in general, but thought she was looking directly at me. I have no idea why I did that, but I tried to be friendly by waving at her. I immediately regretted doing it. Instead of returning the wave, she a few times leaped up and down as though she was ecstatic, and rushed in the direction of one of I sensed that the other houses were probably hers. Somewhat ill, not only had I admitted, however, I had verified that I've been examining my room all day. And she now knew even if she hadn't. Which room was it? Later that evening I inquired with one of he informed me about her via his housemates. That woman had consistently been present, and I should make every effort to ignore her. I asked, just like the others, more about her, but the man actually had no knowledge and claimed to be merely restating what had been spoken to him. Things didn't sit right when he moved in with me, so I inquired until I received any sort of response. One of the elders in the particular home where she resided, I was informed that she was connected to the university was somewhat strange, but that she had no prior records of violence or physical contact. I questioned him. Why didn't anyone think that was as odd as I did? And according to him, they actually couldn't regulate who resided there since it was the property manager's decision. That didn't really satisfy me. Response, but I was powerless I attempted to simply block her from my mind. But one night it became worse. Left my room and came very close to running into her. She was standing in the corridor directly in front of my door. She took me so off guard that I jumped back. It had been past midnight on a Tuesday. The house was largely deserted. Remained silent when she spotted me. Hardly responded at all. Instead, she simply turned and left, as though I am not the one who had trespassed on her. I won't go into every detail, but there were numerous additional incidents, such as that one in which I captured her, or spying at a place where she didn't have business being, or carrying out an action that at one point, I had no business doing. All 3 residences had room keys, but I misplaced mine. Been a part of the same hotel before, thus everyone. There were individual locks and keys in each room. Was a co-op, thus the majority of individuals simply quit. Although their doors were unlocked, I was someone she was unable to sleep well, knowing someone might simply enter my room, so everyone was quite upset about losing my key, including me in their spare, but I was angry as I would have to go create a duplicate of the key, which was an additional anger, was beyond my means at the moment. After a few nights, I woke up at random I wasn't initially sure why that night, but then I heard a gentle bumping sound. Every 20 seconds from my closet, or it sounded as though something was moving inside my closet behind the door, but I'm not one to frighten easily, and I'm most certainly not one to be defenseless in a perilous circumstance. I decided to handle this myself. Silently, I climbed out of bed and took a long inhale. I moved gently in the direction of the trying to keep my breathing under control in the closet. My heart was pounding uncontrollably. Movement. I tore open the wardrobe door and yelled as if they were insane. Just as the woman was inside, as anticipated, and I had one of my ties around her. Her eyes were wide open, and her neck was using her other hand to wield a kitchen knifey. Must have been shocked by my cry, because she lunged before I could respond. As the knife extended toward me, I once more screamed, only this one wasn't. Act as though I was screaming out of sheer terror, forced her to the ground, and managed to disarm, her rapidly considering how she was little and weak, which didn't make. But does that make the situation any less terrifying? She bit, kicked and struggled while she was pinned on the ground and yelled I called out for assistance the entire time, and I heard a few doors smash, and then some of my running down the hall with my housemates. My friend Lee assisted me right away, immobilized both of us and the woman, held her in place as another. For the remainder of the night I phoned the police, was a blur, and the police arrived promptly and immediately arrested her as a result. She had ceased yelling at this time, but she declined to comment either, which was incredibly disturbing that the police discovered the room key was her really major surprise. We received our response a few weeks later. Regarding her identity, it appears that she was the sister of the property manager. He had been allowing leave to remain hidden. She suffered from serious mental health problems, and rather than providing her with the care she needs, she was just flung into one of the vacant rooms, I think the property. The manager was ultimately taken into custody for carelessness, as well as numerous other issues, and I genuinely blame him for it. Far more for what transpired than for her. I feel sorry for her, if anything, but she tried, and sympathy won't change that. To murder me, I might have died. That evening I don't understand why she appeared, genuinely interested in me in particular, but I can only hope that nothing similar ever occurs to me once more. I will shortly graduate, and I will undoubtedly miss college. However, I doubt I'll ever be able to reflect on my time spent here without considering that music. This isn't actually my story. However, I basically watched the entire. I'm saying it regardless because something happened. I have resided in a small, 2-story house for the better with my spouse Benjamin. After 20 years, all of our children are outgoing about their individual lives, and I couldn't be more proud. But I'm going to tell you something. Someone had recently moved in last year. The house on the other side of the street it was very pleasant because I was feeling ill, observing a vacant house outside when I was retired. I spent a lot of time spending time crocheting and reading on my front porch, taking advantage of the weather with my spouse. I also frequently listen to true. There are crime podcasts available, and occasionally I will simply perform music for the one whore. Located to the residence across the street was a young man who drove, perhaps in his mid-20s, a BMW that looks pricey and always wearing ostentatious attire. So I assumed he was either extremely wealthy or I'm acting as though I'm not providing the incorrect perception of him. He was genuinely very charming. He introduced himself to us. His name was Quinn, who was a couple of years away from college, as I had anticipated. He was airily intelligent man who gets along well with. Well, they chuckled with Benjamin and discussed sports, and Benjamin even revealed some of his college tales. It had been a while since I had heard from Quinn. Claimed to have been employed in the entertainment industry, and he worked as a freelancer for a certain online celebrity. In any case, it went over my brain, but it must have been quite profitable, as I mentioned. He appeared to be rather affluent, discussed stocks with Benjamin, and informed us of a few of the investments he was making. He seemed to be a pleasant guy, and everything was typical. As I mentioned, I spent a few months a lot of time on my porch in order for Quinn to. He frequently gives me a wave as he leaves his residence, and I always returned the wave. I can't recall precisely when, but I became aware of the same girl is visiting Quinn's home. She occasionally drove a tiny white car convertible, and she was quite young. Blondes are the kind of girl you would anticipate. To be honest, she would like to date him, wore quite risque clothing, something I didn't entirely understand. He thought she might have been his girlfriend. While he was away, he checked on the house. It made sense because she had her house key, as if it had once become commonplace. Maybe I'd see that automobile roll twice a week. She would go inside while Quinn was away, spend some time there, then depart. I didn't truly comprehend what she was doing, nevertheless. These days, young people date in diverse ways. I therefore didn't share my opinions with anyone else. When I spotted them together in the evening, Quinn pulled in his driveway while she was in the passenger seat, which attested to her his girlfriend, as I thought. But things began shortly after that day. At the very least, it's becoming tense. It felt like I was out one afternoon. I was taking care of my small garden when I heard Quinn was shouting from the other side of the street. As the young woman stood in the shouting at one another in the driveway, I couldn't understand their argument about, but she didn't have to keep. She threw her hands up. She was almost spitting her words at him, appeared as though she was about to hit. Eventually, she got into the car with him, shut the door, and ran away down. The Quinn returned. After shaking his head, he probably didn't even notice me. I assumed it was a romantic breakup every few arguments, and I wasn't supposed to butt where I wasn't supposed to be, but then he noticed the girl's vehicle in front of his house once more, when he wasn't there. Not once, but several times I said Benjamin, and he claimed that prying was impolite, and that I ought to simply abandon the impoverished boy alone, with which I concurred. But then came the evening when everything went. Benjamin and I were sleeping sideways when sirens were wailing outside as we woke up, hurried outdoors to join the small group of the neighbors who had arrived to observe what was happening, and Quinn's house was crowded, all 9 police cars and ambulances. We observed the police officers coming out of the girl in shackles in the house, didn't fight or cry out but accepted what was happening and gazed forward with. We saw Quinn's expression was blank. Hooked ran on a stretcher outdoors. He was a bleeding mess, and I was astounded to see what we waited a week before seeing him again. I was anxious and ill. Benjamin and I went to see how he was doing when he eventually returned, and he allowed us in without any questions, and reportedly told us everything. The girl's name was Ellie, and she had said that she had anything that makes life simple for the first police. She wasn't meant to. She had taken his house key in order to save and created a duplicate without him, being aware that, in his opinion, she began requesting fancy dinners from him, costly travels with jewelry when she became irate and possessive when she hesitated, which is when things began to move forward, downward in their relationship each time she appeared. He hadn't been invited to his residence, conscious that she could access his location through his mobile device, which I was aware that she might have had everything he owned. But worst of all, she had placed covert cameras in his chamber. Each time she returned to his room, when he wasn't at the residence, she was changing the batteries in the camera and confirming that they were still engaged in the "I heard an altercation" between them. Quinn's attempt to end the relationship with she declined, and Quinn grudgingly decided to take a vacation after Ellie saw anything via the cameras, and the following evening, she visited his home with a blade. I won't go into further detail. You understand how Quinn was able to bring her to the grounds, but before the doctor was gravely hurt by her, that he was just a hair's breadth away from needing surgery or demise. Benjamin and I attempted to comfort him, but he appeared shaken. His final words before we departed was that he had discovered the truth about showing off his wealth, especially in lovely girls. Not long after, he moved out. He claimed that didn't make him feel secure. House no more, and his former partner had a ton of pals who were similar to her, and he didn't feel at ease knowing that they may have been aware of his residence. Never again saw him. I asked God to thriving. Nobody should ever need to leave. Particularly through anything like that, not a young person like music. When I first moved into my new home, I was searching for a new beginning. I'm not going to discuss the specifics, but let's just say I had a problematic relationship with an ex that made it hard for me to remain in my former city. Encountered some wealth early in life, and made several poor choices on the kind of females I surrounded myself with. Educational, discovered that the area I relocated to is quite pleasant, largely peaceful, and little crime families. The homes in this area are truly dispersed, which was partly what attracted I was there, but somehow my neighbor's property is substantially closer than the majority of the other properties are assigned to one another, and the size of the house next door is enormous. When I first saw it, I believed I could fit a family of 10, that's the truth. Initially, I thought that a large family resided there with their great-grandparents and anything, but I was unable to more incorrect, despite my best efforts to be low-key. I didn't intend to be impolite. Neighbor, I would like to introduce myself to everyone in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, I chose to present myself to I couldn't tell last time from the next-door neighbors. Why did everyone else I encountered seem to so kind and sincere? I'd estimate that 90% of they had small children of their own, and yes, they were all a little frightening. Solely on the basis of their success, I wasn't really certain how a younger man like myself would readily blend in with that kind of community. Yet, that was more of an individual issue when I managed to meet my next-door neighbor. My social battery was primarily exhausted after spending the day creating chit-chat with strangers. I was aware if I returned home shortly now. I had no intention of being as driven as possible to meet goals, therefore I simply absorbed it and proceeded up their driveway. I had developed a habit of becoming welcomed by a middle-aged individual, thus when a youthful man with a mullet opened, I was a little taken aback by the door. Hell, he appeared younger than I did, which was rather unexpected, but I managed to recover swiftly and proceeded with my new spiel in the neighborhood as I continued. He gave me this enormous smile and truly interrupted me before I could even. After he finished speaking, he remarked something like, "Oh my goodness, someone who was born." What a pleasant surprise. In my decade too told him the same thing while laughing, telling him how out of place I am. Felt like a man in his late 20s who was single. Among countless families with children, he said, advised me to not be concerned about that, and that the majority of those who resided here maintained to themselves, which was somewhat comforting. He identified himself to me as Damon and suggested that I stop by for a drink. There were moments when I shrugged my shoulders and said, "Hell, why not now?" And too, he thought he would chuckle and invite me in. Instead, though, he examined his shoulder as though he was looking over his life room, after which he faced me once more, stating that although he wished he could, he was working hard, so I asked him what he did for a living. Job, since it appears to be a follow-up query regarding his remarks, and he smiled a little less after an odd. He chuckled and just responded, "Finance," but didn't go into any further detail, which I told because I found it a little odd, fairly, and inquired as to whether he had any. To my amazement, one of my roommates told me he resided there by themselves, which was completely, given how large the house was. I thought it was crazy. For a few more minutes we chit-chat, and before returning, he gave me his number. Within it thrilled me that someone my age lived here, particularly because he appeared to like a fairly laid-back man, but I was unable to overcome the strangeness of it. For someone like need to live alone, and yes, I am aware that was basically carrying out the same action, but you must remember, my residence wasn't. I went, nevertheless, even though it was only half his size. Returned home and carried on with my life, which just a few weeks ago, roughly 6 months ago. Thereafter, not much happened. A few days later, I texted Damon. He provided me with his phone so I could try to arrange things up, but his complaints had been constant regarding his busy schedule, and his apologies was that we ultimately couldn't hang out. I stopped pursuing him, not in an antagonistic manner, but rather in a you-do-you manner. I'm absolutely not the kind of person that goes out of her way to help others. For someone who appears uninterested, I never observed anyone entering or leaving, no guests, no parties, at Damon's apartment. Nothing, gals. He never even ordered takeout. Delivered, which struck me as odd, as his vehicle was constantly in the driveway. Sincerely, I had no idea I never saw him at all, so I ate. Depart from the house where the man lived like a ghost. I work both at the office and from home. My residence is situated on the 3rd floor, which reviews out Damon's land. If you're questioning how I was able to learn so much about his lifestyle choices, I realize it sounds compulsive. And rather eerie. Yet his home was just a quick look away from my monitor, too. I was compelled to glance over from. Occasionally, one evening there was, on Wednesday evening, I recall that I clearly woke up at around 2 in the morning to the sound of loud music. I share a bed with my windows open, so I think that's how I woke up so effortlessly that I initially believed I was dreaming, or it was a component of I had a very vivid dream. However, I was incorrect. I climbed out of bed and looked up. They were 7 when I looked out my window. Several vehicles were parked in Damon's driveway. He was having trouble mistaking it. A party, don't you understand? I'm not the kind of person who gripes about noise. I visited a good number of houses. It was the midst of the parties, yet weak, and I assumed the volume was crazy. I would simply knock and request that he refuse it. I put on a sweatshirt and strolled. It was a easy, full-fledged celebration. That much was evident from the outside, so I rapped on the door, but nobody came. I took out my phone to send Damon a text, but I chose against it, knowing that he would most likely disregard and excuse me with some bullshit. The next morning I rapped on the door. Harder this time, yet nothing has changed. Anticipated it and reached for the handle half. To be locked, but I was shocked to see that the first thing I saw was the door swinging open inside. The foyer had a stack of shoes at 10 or more pairs, but something off. There was absolutely nobody inside. I proceeded in anticipation of seeing individuals in the living room, possibly the kitchen, but it was totally deserted. Not even a single drink was left out. Over the music I could hear individuals was playing in the background, yet something I didn't comprehend at first, but it truly heard it, and it struck a chord. Suddenly it wasn't even music to me. Actually, it was a recording of yelling and laughter, glasses clinking. The entire gathering was fake everything, but it didn't make it made sense to me, but it didn't clarify the shoes or the vehicles that folks were in. That much was certain about that house. They ought to have gone the other way at that moment, but I had to know what was happening. Went around the home inconspicuously until I noticed a door that was a little jarred. Pushed it open carefully, and it led down to the basement. I don't know how I found out, but I found what I was seeking in something was downstairs. Down those stairs it was dark. Staircases aside from a fragile. There's light coming from somewhere. I was unable to. You see, there was no justification for going down. There. I did it even though I knew that. In any case, I reached the bottom of the steps and turned to see the light arriving. From a different door farther within, I slipped toward the basement. And as it grew nearer, I began to notice one more sound that I couldn't hear prior to the music. It sounded it was this heavy, rhythmic, mechanical grinding like a buzz, or strong equipment observed or anything. I moved a bit nearer. Sufficiently near to see through the fracture, 3 individuals were standing and looking across the room at something that they were unable to see, all much older-looking men. They were dressed in clothing older than Damon's, wore these heavy-duty labor clothes, goggles for protection and thick rubber gloves. Additionally, I noticed that they were wearing what appeared to be work boots. Notwithstanding all those other shoes were visible to me. Upstairs, in various situations, I would have presumed that they were workers in construction. I was quite eager to observe the object of their gaze, but it was, after a few seconds, it is too far out of sight. Of me only standing there, I began to detect this terrible bleach odor or a cleaning solution of any sort. That's what made it happen for me. I became aware of I get a terrible pit in my stomach, similar to my life was in jeopardy. I am unable to explain it. It turned to go, making an effort to remain as silent as I was navigating my way back to the light behind me on the stairs, faded abruptly, as if someone had closed the door behind me. I didn't really hear the music over the door. However, I sensed it and ran up the steps. I sprinted as quickly as I could through the and rushed out the front entrance of the house. Antihu jumped, rather than running straight to my house, reached the backyard, hand-erected my fence. Through my side door I crept in. I've locked it behind me. My chest was pounding, but not in any situation would I be able to allow Damon or any other guys are aware that I was the one who had been snooping around. I collected myself and walked up to my office to confirm there were no lights up there. Squatted beneath the window and peeked at Damon's residence. There was nobody there, however, after a few minutes. After a while, the front door swung open, and 8 men came out, looking about the yard, the street, and the driveway. But Damon wasn't, I could tell with them, since everyone appeared older, much like my first boyfriends. Observed that several of them appeared to be arguing over something, but I was unable to discern their words. One of them, in fact, one of the men shoved the other. And I believed they were going to begin altercations in the street, but they didn't. They all return in the end. Inside, and shortly after that, the music stopped. That I attempted to complete while standing by the window makes sense of the recent events. I considered phoning the police. But what is it accurate to state that the music wasn't no longer playing and there was no actual criminal activity? In fact, I could report the incident. I found it incomprehensible that none of there was an issue with the other neighbors. Loud music, particularly given that the majority of them had kids. I assumed Damon would have recognized me in the shoes if they could have heard it, and I had contacted the cops. I also didn't know what that was about. Everyone I had seen was dressed in. Did they bring more pairs of boots? Shoes that I simply left in the entryway. Too many inquiries, and I was clueless. What to do in order to? I simply went to bed. I woke up the following morning and checked out. My every single automobile had vanished from the bedroom window. Encompassing Damon's, I tried going upstairs and finished some tasks. However, I was unable to focus and discovered that I was looking every 5 seconds over at Dad's residence. A couple of hours after his vehicle wasn't, I decided to take a walk there in part, to decompress, but primarily to take some discreet peeks through his windows. Days went by with nothing, except Damon didn't come back yet, or his vehicle didn't. And at the very least, I was perplexed by each passing day. I was still unable to understand how the rest of the neighbors had been able to rest. Amidst all the sounds that evening, so did two simply ask them. I went to a few homes and inquired whether they had heard about the gathering he had a few nights prior. Nobody understood what I was discussing, even after I identified the house was arriving from and how late that was. A few times I felt I was going insane. Damon is the strange thing that started months ago, has not yet returned, and it is obvious that one is keeping up his residence as the grass is beginning to grow quite long, and a stack of unopened packages is present. Pressed up against his front door. I don't know how to interpret this. It might be, I feel like nobody would go at nothing going so far as to conceal what they, unless it is something we are doing with the F party, was against the law. But would individuals going so far as to truly forget something as crucial as locking the front door? Perhaps that's what those men had been debating, the fact that I truly don't notion, and the reality that none of my neighbors appear disturbed by it, which bothers me. Believe I'm a part of some enormous plot or whatever. I'm just aware of being suspicious, but I simply have a lot of unresolved issues upon Damon's return. If he does, I'm considering whether or not I should go ahead and ask directly.